Works at Schubert Phyllis as a customer director. He has over 2 decades of experience in developing, delivering, and running custom software solutions. Please give a warm welcome to Stefan Holdermans.
Thank you. So, over a decade ago already, Mark Andreessen famously claimed software is eating the world. So he did so in his essay that was published in the Wall Street Journal, and he was basically observing that software is more and more pervasive, transformative, if you will, in various kind of industries beyond just the technology industry. And basically this article kind of read like the announcement of this new software-centric era. And kind of the big idea was that for the companies who are able to adapt to this era, well, they would be able to thrive, but the ones who would, well, not be able to harness software, they would be at risk of becoming obsolete. So, in a nutshell, many companies would need to become software companies. So, what does that entail? Today I want to focus on, not just the digital native companies, the, I don't know, Airbnbs, but more traditional companies of a certain size, enterprises, if you will. And let's talk a bit about what it means for those kind of companies to become software companies. I don't know, banks, traditional retail companies, stuff like that. So there's various reasons for these kind of companies to want to be software companies. Varying from, market expansion, trying to fight off the risk of being disrupted by a digitally native company, but also things like, optimize your operational efficiency so you can become more competitive, right? So one could say that constitutes value, and business value, that's quite a tricky topic to clearly define. So Mark Schwartz wrote a whole book about it, so I'm happy to sidestep that now for a minute, but let's assume, these companies know the reason for wanting to embark on a software journey. They have good reasons for that. That's important that they have. So many companies obviously have been doing that over the last more than a decade even, right? So given that, I think the question is reasonable to ask, how are they doing? And it's fair to say that a lot of companies are actually doing quite well. There's quite a bunch of success stories out there. These are the companies that you see at tech conferences, featured in keynote talks. But also I know there's also quite a bit of companies that really struggle with becoming successful with software. And we're going to talk a bit about those companies. And we're going to hone in a bit on what kind of difficulties they run into. But before we do so, this is not to bash those companies or so, or to make fun out of them, because I genuinely believe this is hard. For a lot of companies, it's hard to be successful with software. So we should show a bit of, empathy and even sympathy to that, I would say. So with that in mind, let's hone in a bit on what could be reasons that companies struggle with becoming successful with software. And we're going to talk about, 3 categories of pitfalls that organizations may run into. That's struggling with staffing, it's abdication of accountability, that sounds fancy, doesn't it? And deceleration by drag. So let's go over them one by one. Struggling with staffing. It's kind of obvious, right? If you want to be successful with software, you need to build software, and software is built by, developers. So it's kind of obvious that you need developers. But that's not so easy, actually, right? We all want this mythical 10x developer, right? So, but the reality is those are quite scarce, those developers. And even if you're looking for just mere mortals like you and me, it could be that they're quite hard to find, right? There's a war for talent going on. There's companies are all fighting each other to get talented developers, and that war that really surged, after the pandemic, and now perhaps it's relaxing a bit. There's some layoffs in big tech, so that kind of bubbles down. But I think for quite a while already, consistently, good developers are in high demand and are hard to find. And by the way, it's actually ridiculous to refer to this as a war for talent, right? Companies are not literally at war for each other. War, that has a very different meaning, so let's not use that anymore. It's enough to say they're competing for talent. And big thank you to my colleague Marike, who a while ago already pointed out when I was in a meeting and we were discussing this topic that war is a ridiculous term to refer to this. So we're not going to do that anymore, okay? But nevertheless, this for lots of companies, this is a real issue, right? So what can you do about it? Frankly, I don't know that well, right? There's no silver bullet here. What helps, what seems to help is, admit to the outside world, even if you're a company that's not directly associated with as being a high-tech company or that, admit to the outside world that you are in fact a technology company. So make sure that your technical folks speak at conferences, for example, or contribute to open source. It kind of helps, that it helps make you recognizable as a technology company, and that may attract some people. But all in all, this is hard, right? So even before you can embark on your software journey, getting your staffing in order, that's really a challenge. So what a lot of companies typically do is the positions that they can't fulfill themselves, they fill with temporary staff. And with temporary staff, I just mean, contractors or people that you hire via some kind of secondment construction, stuff like that. And then most companies, so they at least they get their team staffed that way. What I see a lot is that a lot of organizations are kind of half-hearted at that, right? So they hire this temporary staff, but they're also, they're not completely blind to the blind sides of it, of the downsides of it, of course. And those downsides, in their perception, is often like, then if you have a lot of temporary staff, you also rely a lot of temporary staff. And an obvious downside of temporary staff is that they're, temporary. So at some point they leave your company, and with it a lot of knowledge goes out of your company. And a lot of organizations are very wary about that, and then they introduce policies like that there's a limitation on the term of contract, so you can't be employed as a contractor at this company longer than 2 years or so. But that also that leads sometimes to kind of a mess, because then on average you're renewing a considerable part of your workforce every 2 years, and that brings a lot of overhead, knowledge transfers and stuff like that, farewell parties. That's a lot of time. So that is not, that's cumbersome. So this is really an issue for a lot of companies who see huge groups of people just leaving every 2 years on average. And it also there's another downside to it, right? If you have temporary staff, then it also feels, if you're building a team, it has some consequences, So if you have a lot of people in your teams that know that at some point they're going to move on again, it's also hard to build teams. And I think teams, for me at least, are an essential part to become successful with software. And I really believe, that with a good team, that the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts, as they say, larger than the sum of the parts. And that's sometimes harder with temporary staff. So not to say that you can't do it, right? But you just have to be aware of it and make sure that you kind of counter that. Building teams also, got harder the last couple of years. And that, of course, all has to do with the pandemic and kind of the fact that more and more we work remotely. And don't get me wrong, I'm kind of grateful that one of the things that came out of this whole pandemic is that we actually, as an industry, kind of learned how to effectively figure out how to work remotely, right? At least, my toolbox was rather empty in this respect, and it got filled with quite a lot of tools, sometimes literally, Teams, Zoom, to effectively work remotely. So I think we gained something with it, but I also think we lost something with it. And especially if you're building a new team and you're all, dispersed, sometimes all over the world, it's kind of hard to build a team. And yeah, perhaps I'm an old-fashioned guy, but I really see a lot of value in, being together in the same room. If we're sitting next to each other, I don't know, coding, sometimes I can tell, by the mere number of W2S per minute, how the person next to me is doing, right? Whether they are struggling with something. And if I got a feeling they're struggling with something, I can ask, what's going on? Can I help? Have you looked there? Oh, you forgot to, you know it, right? So that's a lot harder when you have to communicate remotely. And just the barrier to ask for help is a lot bigger, right? If you have to jump on a call and stuff like that, or have to phone someone. So perhaps you hold off a bit and try to, figure it out for yourself. And I think we lose something there. I know there's teams, who've figured ways to avoid it. I know teams that, at the beginning of the day just open a video conference and everyone puts their camera on, so it's like they're in the same room, and that can be effective, right? But it's something you need to be aware of. All I'm trying to say is, building an organization that's going to be successful with software in terms of staffing isn't just hiring people or getting temporary staff on board. You really have to be mindful how you're going to build those teams. And that's something that a lot of organizations have trouble with. The next one then, abdication of accountability. Yeah, and this ties into this concept of the value that companies want to get out of their software endeavors. So, yeah, this is going to be a fairly unpopular opinion, perhaps, but I really think that technical people, engineering people, in a lot of situations, really suck at making themselves accountable for results. And oftentimes that happens under the banner of, we're agile. So we're just, we do our sprints, we do our ceremonies, and we go from sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint. And we build something, and we see what we get out of it, and then get off our backs. That's how we work. And we're not going to talk about, plans and the results that we want to get out, and looking at the longer term and what we're going to build in terms of value for the company. And sometimes that really start to think, so is this agile thing failing here, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of agile. I'm a true believer in agile, but sometimes I wonder what agile has become to mean in the industry is taking a very bad turn. So I see a lot of teams that say, well, okay, we're agile, so that means we do Scrum, that kind of is the same. So that means we do stand-ups every day, we do a retro, perhaps some backlog grooming, we have some rituals, and that's that. And no planning, right? We're agile now. And a lot of engineers in that kind of organizations kind of complain that the organization doesn't get them because it insists that they make plans and that they look further ahead than just a couple of sprints and stuff like that. But we don't do planning, right? We're agile. But that's not what agile meant to be. Who said that you don't have a plan? So for me, the core of working agile is that you give yourself, the present of being able to incorporate feedback. So you make a plan, it's not set in stone, you go, you work, and you learn something. You learn something, and then maybe adapt the plan, and be transparent about it, be accountable about it towards the rest of the organization. And I see a lot of teams actually failing, just under the banner of Agile. They're like, okay, leave me alone, I do my stand-ups, and get off my back. That goes wrong. Also, a team should allow itself to, actually get feedback, even if they're agile. So that means, building working software in small increments and make that available to the organization and get feedback on that, right? But often we're still stuck in those projects where we plan to go live in 3/4 of a year, and our goal for the next sprint is to have this feature 34% done. Yeah, that's not a way to get feedback, right? And I see that a lot. And that's not going to make the business happy. The business, yeah. That's another thing, right? So we do it all the time. We talk about the business as it's something, that's far, far away. We are IT, they are the business, they should get off our backs. It's ridiculous. It should be our business, right? If we really, if we're really determined, to bring value, then we can't talk about the business. We should stop with this divide between, IT and the business. If IT wants to take itself serious, stop making use of this divide. It's our business. So, not a lot of accountability, right? So if we're not accountable as IT, what are we keeping ourselves busy with then, if it's not business value? Well, we have our hobbies. We're large organizations, we're enterprises, so we have adopt Agile. So we do an Agile transformation. That sounds like fun. And we are large, we have a lot of teams, so we're not just going to do Agile, we have to do it at scale. So and a lot of time is spent on figuring out how to apply Agile in a large organization, right? We adopt a framework. There's a couple of populars out there. For example, SAFe. And that's a weird one, right? SAFe. So I don't get a lot of developers. I don't come across a lot of developers who are actually enthusiastic about it. Because there's a lot of ceremonies and stuff like that, but organizations seem to love it, this kind of frameworks. And then, so it's kind of easy and it's kind of tempting to now start to bash these methodologies, but it's also, if you try, it's a bit hard, right? So if you go over it, descriptions of these frameworks, I must admit, most of them are all just a collection of practices that all individually seem like good ideas. So it's also, hard to figure out why it's not a good idea. So perhaps if the whole can be, larger than the sum of parts, perhaps the other way around is also true, right? Perhaps the whole can also be less than the sum of parts. I'm still struggling with that. So one of my favorite parts of SAFe is that's something that you do every quarter, is you do PI planning, and then we get all the teams in a room and we start planning. And what's going on here is all the teams, make a plan for the quarter, and they put it in Post-its, and it's all nice. But then the magic happens. Then you I'm not sure these days. Of course, it's all going remotely. But when we did this physically, we got these little wooden red strings, and we're going to map the dependencies between the teams. So all these red lines that you see here, that's actually where one team cannot proceed with their plan if a deliverable from another team isn't there. And this is mind-boggling, right? So this is presented, as the solution of, the problem of, dependencies between teams. This is not a solution. This is a visualization of the problem. That's for sure. But I'm not sure that it's a solution, right? So whenever I'm in such a PI event and stuff like that, I'm always looking, are there any architects in the room? Because if you're an architect, here's feedback. If we talk about feedback, this is feedback on your architecture. So I think if you're a lot of teams working concurrently on software products, try to minimize in your architecture the level of dependencies, between it, so that those teams can just work in a consistent space and deliver stuff, and they're not waiting for each other. Visualizing it is not the solution, I reckon, at least. So Conway's law is your best friend here. Conway's law says, well, organizations have a tendency to, create systems and architecture that kind of mirror the structure of their teams, right? And then there's a popular idea of the inverse Conway maneuver, where you say, right, so we organize our teams so that kind of reflects the desired architecture. Well, sometimes that's a solution, right? You can also do it the other way around, You can adapt your architecture if you're dead set on a team structure, stuff like that. But do it as architects. Take this feedback at heart and make sure that there's flow again in the organization. What do these organizations also do? They measure. They measure. There's a lot of measurements going on, but if you look really closely at most of those measurements, and there's nice dashboards, it's about the predictability of the team, how often were sprint goals achieved and stuff like that, and then team happiness. And those are very important, right? Those can be metrics that are very important for an individual team. How predictable are we? How can we improve? How happy are we? How can we improve? For an individual team, that actually makes sense. But if you just roll it up to the whole organization, then for me, this often, this is kind of like vanity metrics. It's IT showing off how well they're doing, IT things. I think it should always include some sort of business metrics, business goals that you want to achieve, right? So that's how you measure progress, and then you can complement it by these other things. Just want to say both of them are, important, but if you only focus on these, I call it vanity metrics, then yeah, that's not very useful. So measure what matters. So that's abdication of accountability, and then there's deceleration by drag. And with drag, I mean, kind of the opposite of flow. Flow, that's when a team at a consistent pace, delivers, a rapid pace, hopefully, delivers values and features, etc. And drag is the opposite. It's actually when that pace goes down and, you slow down. And because that's the thing, right? So, a lot of times it's actually easy, when you start a new endeavor to get some speed, to get some features out, especially these days with cloud technology. You swipe a credit card, you have an environment, you spin it up, you build your first couple of features, and then, well, we're all enthusiastic, right? We're good to go. But then after a while, for various reasons, you slow down. So sustainable speed, that's hard. And a couple of reasons. But with time, that's important, right? So over time, keeping your pace, that's hard. So I really like this book. It's written by a couple of guys from Google, and I like it for various reasons. But what I kind of like is their definition of software engineering. They say software engineering is programming, just coding, but over time. And over time, that's a lot of time that makes it difficult to build a software project or a product that's sustainable. One of the reasons that it's hard to keep sustainable pace, that has to do with, I really love this, the basal metabolic rate. What's that? Basic metabolic rate is something from biology. It's kind of the energy that an organism consumes just by doing nothing, just vital, life-sustaining functions, resting, if you will, but nothing more. And that takes energy. And in most organisms, for humans at least, when you grow older, this rate goes up. It takes more energy to keep the body alive, right? So when you're still a puppy, it's all okay, but when you get older, you consume more energy. And the same kind of holds for software. And this insight I got from a blog by Eduardo Ferro in, I believe it was February 21. And he kind of draws a comparison between this idea of a basic metabolic rate and a software product. And he kind of says, right, if your software product starts out as a puppy, it takes fairly little energy, to keep it alive, to kind of maintain it. But as it grows, if you add features, there's a cost involved, right? So there's more knowledge that you have to maintain in your team every time you add a feature. But also when you integrate new features, it has to be, integrated and compatible with all the features that you've already built, right? So you add something and a lot of unit tests or so breaks and you need to fix that. So it gets harder and harder to add stuff. And because it gets harder, it takes more effort. But this effort kind of eats out of your team capacity, right? So if you have a fixed team capacity over time, you hope, of course, that your team gets better and more productive, and that's what we oftentimes promise ourselves. But in reality, it's not that weird that you get less productive because you have more stuff to maintain. And that's an expectation that's very hardly and very seldomly managed towards our stakeholders. So the best we can do is trying to keep this rate as low as possible, right? And that means, for example, be very mindful about the technical debt that you take on. But keep in mind, right? Not all technical debt is a bad thing. Well, technical debt is also something, forgive me, that engineers are sometimes complaining about, right? Our technical debt is accumulating, but the product owner doesn't let us work on it because we have to deliver features. But you know, sometimes it can be a very reasonable choice, right? So if you know the value that you're producing, if you have that in mind, you can make that trade-off. And just like in real life, you know, if you take on a mortgage or so, you take a debt, and that's for a lot of people, that's a responsible decision. And the same holds for technical debt. But to make it responsible, you have to do it, you know, very mindful. You have to be very much aware of what you're doing. I think that's the fact. So not all technical debt is bad, but in order to be successful and to, you know, keep the space, you have to at least do it in a responsible way. And a lot of time, this definitely holds for traditional organizations in comparison to, you know, digitally native ones. It's a topic of one of the open spaces, stuff like security, risk, and compliance, right? So if you start a new thing in a big company, let's say it's in the financial industry or so, then you get out your first features and everyone's happy and successful, and at some point the risk officer wakes up in the morning, has a bad morning, thinks, oh, what are those guys putting live, right? And there's all of a sudden there's all kind of red tape and there's all kind of procedures that you have to deal with. And then all of a sudden you can't put stuff in production anymore and you have to go over checklists and I don't know. And that really slows you down, right? And a lot of this has to do, you know, with the misconception that a lot of organizations have about DevOps. They think, well, DevOps, that's kind of simple, right? That just means, well, you build it, you run it. And when you run it, well, that then also means that you're responsible for all this compliance and security stuff and that, yeah, that eats out of your time and that makes you less productive with features, and that's a fact of life. Then you slow down. Yeah, I think that's a misconception, right? So DevOps is far more than that, right? So out of this, you know, these 5 principles, I think automation is a key one. Because that's your way out here, right? So for a lot of these things with security, compliance, stuff like that, if you, as a team, if you set your mind on, you know, automate the manual bits out of it, the boring parts out of it, that's perhaps a way how you can be, you know, still fast enough in your delivery. So everything is code, basically, right? So not just infra as code, but, you know, do security as code, do policy as code, do compliance as code, do everything as code. That's hard, by the way. That's hard, right? Because you still need people who automate that away. You still need people who, you know about this. You still need someone who knows about security. It's like you need someone who knows about networking and all that. And, you know, if you have, I don't know, if you're a big organization and you have, I don't know, 100 DevOps teams, does it mean that you have those skills in all your teams? Do you need 100 persons at least who know something about security? That can be a challenge, right? So one way out here is perhaps, you know, platform engineering, right? And that's, to be honest, so actually have some central facilities in your ecosystem where you kind of offer the automation for, you know, security, compliance, etc., to a whole lot of other teams and kind of actually leverage the scale that you have as a big enterprise. Well, that's a topic, you know, that doesn't only deserve its own talk, that deserves its own track, basically. Now, luckily, there is a whole track about that tomorrow, so be there. But for now, I think what I want to say here about it is again, be mindful, right? So building platforms is also hard. You're still going to need very good people, perhaps even better people, to build good platforms. So you kind of have the same problem. You kind of have to approach it the same way. And also, don't make it a hobby. It's very tempting, you know, accountability. It's very tempting to set out on building the perfect platform and spend first 1.5, 2 years on that before you actually start to deliver business. And then we're full circle again, because then you have all 3 issues here. And well, thank you. I think that was a quick glance of some things that I see happening.